Hello, everybody. This is a male space. I'm joined today by Dr. Baskerville for our show Men Today, in which we discuss men's issues and men's well being. Today, we are going to discuss conservative failure. Go to the description of this video for links to Dr. Baskerville's articles on this subject, especially the one titled The Tragedy of Conservatism, recently published on Substack, and for more information about what we speak about. So, Dr. Baskerville, we are going to cover conservatism today, and I'm sure a portion of the audience that we speak to probably consider themselves conservatives. So here we go. You say conservatives lose all their battles. Is it really all of them, or just battles involving the family and sexuality?
Well, they certainly lose the ones involving family and sexuality the most. I think their failures are virtually unbroken. But I think it's gone beyond that now. They're really losing all their battles, and they have been for decades. Actually, I'm not the first one to say this. I came across a now kind of somewhat obscure book by Pat Buchanan back in 1975, where he says the title of the book says, is conservative failure. We've lost them all. And then the kind of dissident right winger Sam Francis published a book in '94, I think, called Essays in the Failure of Conservatism. And he said virtually the same thing. The conservatives just lose all their battles. And there's a fairly famous article back in it was in the '90s, I think, by James Dobson of Focus on the Family, where he said basically the same thing. We've just lost all of our battles. And that one, that was issues of the family and sexuality and so forth. So, this and I'm just pointing out. I start with a quote from the early that says basically since the end of the Cold War, since the '90s, conservatives have not won any of their battles. And it's very true. They don't. They've lost them all. And I think these are connected. I don't think this is just a coincidence. I think the fact that conservatives have well, there's a number of reasons. There's some long-term reasons, but I think the most immediate reason is they've really dropped the ball on sexuality. They just do not understand issues of family, sexuality, gender, if you prefer. They don't understand sexual radicalism, feminism. They can express, they can express their dislike of transgenderism and homosexualism, but the feminism, which is really the dangerous one, they, they just keep their hands off it. They just don't want to go there.
Yes. Well, conservatives always claim to care about the family. Today, the family isn't perhaps its greatest crisis ever, so conservatives should be offering solutions and benefiting politically. But where are they?
Good question. That's the big question, isn't it? Yeah, they're always banging on about the family and about the sanctity of the family and the importance of marriage, and they start organizations and they do campaigns and so forth. And yet, the family just gets worse. The crisis of the family just gets worse, and conservatives alienate people, and they don't achieve anything. They just keep losing their battles, and it gets even worse. Maybe we can talk about how it's getting worse later. But yeah, so why is that? Well, again, anybody who's been involved in issues of family and marriage in a serious way, and I don't just mean same-sex marriage. See, that's what conservatives do. They pick up whatever's on the radar screen at the moment, whatever's in the media radar screen. If the homosexuals are pushing for same-sex marriage, then they want to defend it against that. But and they do that because they get contributions, they get attention, they get media, and they get money and they get attention. So they'll focus on whatever's hot in the last 24 hours or the last couple of months. But do they really go into marriage? Because if you look at it deep down, the homosexuals and the transgenderists, they're not the ones that are destroying marriage and the family. It's the heterosexuals. I wrote an article on that in the American Conservative a few years ago. It's the heterosexuals that are destroying it, and especially I think the feminists and the conservatives who failed to challenge the feminists. So they don't deal with the big issues. Anybody who's involved with men's issues, or even women who are involved with issues like divorce and child custody and child abuse, domestic violence. They know that these are just the conservatives. Again, they just don't want to go there. They don't, and these are the things that are really destroying the family.
Well, I just want to sort of throw something out there that just came to my mind as you were talking about this. Considering what I've read about conservatism and your articles in particular over the past few years, do you think there's a certain personality that is common amongst conservatives, sort of like, let's say, a rule following, which I mean, rule following is good, but do you think there's, let's say, a kind of go along to get along attitude amongst them? Whereas even if we go back a very long time, I mean, over a century, the left has always been whether we like them or not, they have always been brutal, vicious. They will stop at nothing. We could even look at the Soviet Union and the communists. They really, when they want something, they're going to the limit for it. Is that what you've noticed? That the leftists, they will fight dirty, they will humiliate, they will go to the limit. But the conservative thinks that you can actually bring a knife to a gunfight.
There's a lot of truth in that. Yes, in fact, I think the word Bolshevik has really kind of entered our vocabulary as that kind of, you know, small numbers of very determined, very ideological, very well disciplined, very single-minded activists who exercise an influence far out of the proportion of their numbers and manage to win battle after battle. Whereas the right, you find them wanting to build consensus and, as you say, to be Mr. Nice Guy. There is truth in that. There's no doubt about it. But I think there's something even worse than that, though. I think that's you're being charitable there to some extent. There's also a sense in which the right, as I argue in the article, is not really interested in winning. They're interested in building power for themselves, power that not necessarily to win their battles, to defeat the left on specific issues, but power in the larger sense. They want influence in Washington and other capitals. They want to build organizations. They want to they want to procure money for their organizations and for themselves. They want to profit. They want to get rich. Face it, conservatives have a weakness for a nice lifestyle and for acquisition of material wealth. And if you look at Tucker Carlson's interview of Peter Brimelow recently, who was a dissident conservative, he points out that William F. Buckley at the National Review was basically using money, the expense account at the National Review, to subsidize his own lifestyle, his sailing and his high life and his fashionable pastimes, and it was all on the expense account of the magazine. So there is a sense in which there is something about, and here I mean professional conservatives, and this is who I really take a name at. I don't mean you and me. And as you say, everybody who's not on the left these days kind of considers themselves to be a conservative. I mean the conservatives with an uppercase C, the professionals, those whose livelihoods, in some sense, are dependent upon their identification as conservatives. They work for organizations, they work as public intellectuals, they obviously elected officials, party members, interest groups, think tanks. The people whose livelihood depends on being identified as a conservative and who influence the rest of us. These are the ones that they really want to build their influence and their organizations and their power in a broad sense, which is actually more important even than winning their battles.
Yes, I agree with that. And we can even see that, I believe, in some of these TradCon influencers. When you see some of these TradCons online, let's say someone could see some of their backgrounds. They come from very rich families. They come from the upper class, when really it's the middle class, and how I see it, and the lower classes who really have the most struggles in forming families and in dating, whatever that is these days. So I see what you're saying, actually. There's a sort of theatrics, influence, performance, and, well, everything you just said.
Yeah, no, you're right, and a lot of it is the media, is how to look good on the media, and yeah, there's a sense in which they. So I was going to make a point and now I lost it, but there's a sense in which a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, a lot of it is show, a lot of it is ostentation, and they you could, I mean, my example about Buckley, there's a number of those I could cite. Probably shouldn't,
Yeah.
without proof, but these stories are a dime a dozen. And there is a sense in which they are, yeah, they are on the take to some extent. Not
Yes.
necessarily illegally. Not necessarily, I'm not saying they're double dipping or doing this illegally. I'm just saying their priorities are not the same as you and me.
Yes. So, is the family crisis insoluble, or are conservatives simply incompetent?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Uh, well, they're not committed. They're not really committed to the family crisis or anything else. So I would say no. I don't think the family crisis is at all insoluble or intractable. We often hear it is, and I hear this. This is one of the lines we hear from conservatives and liberals who work in these areas professionally. They list all the barriers, all the difficulties of the family crisis, but no, it's not. I mean, again, those of us who are involved in issues like parental rights and fatherhood and the divorce and child custody industries, um, they haven't even tried. They haven't even made an effort. These things are relatively easily solved. I mean, we legislated no fault divorce with the stroke of a pen back in the 69 and 70s. It could be enacted. It could be it could be canceled with the stroke of a pen. Also, child custody decisions could also be passed, as Kentucky and a few other states did, and in some legislatures, maybe half-heartedly, but they did it. So no, the actual mechanisms for solving these problems are relatively simple. Now, politically, it's another matter. Politically, it's very hazardous. If you tried to enact or repeal the measures that I've mentioned, you would be punished for it quite severely by politically influential people, but including politically influential people on the right as well as the left. But the actual solutions are pretty obvious. They just don't want to deal with it.
Yes. Now, this probably ties into what we were talking about just a few moments ago, is that the conservatives always seem to be helping the left. But see, to me, that would tie into what you just said, their lifestyles, their influence, and to keep things safe so that they can amplify their influence and lifestyle. Keep
Very
things.
much, very much so. Yeah, the history of conservatism for quite a long time actually has been a history of imitating the left. They imitate the left. The left comes up with these techniques, these new styles of politics, very organizational. The left really invented political parties, and in some ways, the left after that invented interest groups. In some ways, and the left certainly invented ideology and ideological politics. And conservatives, rather than kind of refusing to play that game and remaining aloof from it and enlisting the broad base of the citizenry, they imitate that. They create their own political parties. They create their own interest groups. They reformulate conservatism into a kind of counter ideology, which so there's this kind of pas de deux going on, this kind of two-step, where the left innovates something, the left comes up with some innovation, and the right imitates it, and some extreme, as you say, in extreme forms, they even collaborate with it. They
Yes.
and Now ostensibly they do this to do their battle of the left more effectively, to beat the left at their own game. But really, there's also a sense in which they do it in order to ingratiate themselves into the centers of power. If you want to be powerful in Washington or any other capital, the way to do it is to imitate the techniques and the methods of the left, and to go to their cocktail parties and their dinner parties, and to rub shoulders with them, and to create think tanks that rub shoulders with their think tanks, and universities that are integrated with their universities. So there is a sense in which the right is they are collaborationist, very much so. Whether they have to be, well, they certainly don't have to be to the extent that they are.
Do you include Donald Trump in your criticism of traditional conservatives?
Uh, at first, no, No, not at all. Trump is the exception. He's very much the exception to my argument about conservatism. He bypassed in his, I think, in his climb up the ladder. He never became an elected official before. He didn't play party political games. He didn't, he didn't. Well, he didn't go along with any of that, and he did it very skillfully. I mean, to become a president of the United States twice over the opposition of the CIA and other centers of power is pretty impressive achievement, pretty skillful. So Trump, how did he do that? Well, I don't know. It's a good question. I think one way may have been the fact that he was independently wealthy. A lot of his friends are independently wealthy. Elon Musk, Ramaswamy, RFK Jr. There is a sense in which, independent wealth allows you to bypass the donor class, bypass the. Now, I'm not saying this is we should elect nothing but rich men to run our politics, but there is a sense sometimes in which, like the old conservative, like the old aristocracy, wealth, independent means can give you a certain amount of independence politically. It can also, of course, create corruption. So it's no guarantee. For whatever reason, though, Trump, I think, in somewhat in his first term, but I think even more in this term, has shown himself liable to pressure from the donor class, the very people that he challenged. In foreign policy, it's the neocons. In domestic policy, it's the tradcons, as you say, the traditional conservative establishments. And they've put enormous pressure on him, probably more pressure than most of us realize. And I've been willing up to now to give him somewhat of the benefit of the doubt in the hope that he really wants to do the right thing, but is having to maneuver among in impossible situations, impossible amounts of pressure on him to fall in line with neocon foreign policy and traditional conservative establishment in domestic policy. So we'll see. We'll see how this turns out. But and now that he talks out of both sides of his mouth. He changes his mind, or he seems to change his mind. He says one thing one day or 1 hour, and the complete opposite. That might be, instability, but it might be the way he maneuvers around out of an impossible situation. I don't know. Like I say, any man who gets elected president twice under this pressure and in the face of the opposition that he has is doing something right and has some serious skill. So I'm hesitant to condemn him too abruptly, but some of the things he does are pretty shocking.
Yes. Do you think personal behavior, like sexual choices, affects a leader's ability to tackle big societal problems?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Pardon me. Up till now, I suppose when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, the answer to that question would have been no. I mean, it's his personal life. It's his business. It's his family life, his personal life, whether it's within his family or on the side of his family. You and I might not like it, but that's his business. And I grew up. The earliest president I remember is John F. Kennedy, barely. And of course, look at his private life. Look at his fidelity to the marriage contract. And in Europe, there's always been this attitude, especially among the French, where I spent my first few years, of French politicians, Francois Mitterrand, and all of them, had always had something going on the side. British politicians have been almost as bad sometimes. So, traditionally, I'm very tempted to say no. I like to separate one's private life and one's public life. I think in principle, that's what we should do. Having said all that, though, I think the fact nowadays that sexuality and family life are such important parts and salient and critical parts of the public agenda and of the larger political crisis today, that I think it does. I think you can show that it does have very concretely detrimental effects, and very seriously limit the ability of politicians to confront and tackle some of these very critical issues. And the best example, I mean, you could cite Trump in that respect, that his extramarital affairs and so forth, and his sometimes crude behavior toward women undermines his base of his credibility with women, perhaps with potential supporters who are socially conservative. It doesn't seem to. He seems to get a lot of support even among evangelical Protestants. But perhaps a better example than Trump is Elon Musk.
Yes.
Elon Musk, who has, I think it's well known, well documented, I don't think he denies it, that he's fathered many children out of wedlock, that he's run into problems with the divorce and custody machinery. And yet and on top of that, he's independently wealthy, which gives him no excuse, in my view, for not speaking out about these issues, about the abuses of these industries. And yet, what does he do, given his personal experience with fathering children out of wedlock, with troublesome single mothers with whom he's fathered these children, with the custody machinery, the child support system, all of this? Does he stand up to it? Does he speak out about it? Does he express concern for the men and some women who fall afoul of this crooked, very crooked, corrupt industry? Does he call public attention? No, he talks about going to Mars. I think his personal life has not facilitated his ability, his willingness to take a public stand on an important issues. It's had the opposite effect. It's led him to clamp down and to reinforce the news blackout that we all see around these issues. And I see that in a lot of conservatives. Over the years, I've had a number of conservative politicos approach me privately and say, "This is off the record. I don't want to talk about this publicly." But they've seen my books and my articles, and they say, "I've run into this. I'm having a custody battle. It's private. What can I do about it?" And my reply is always the same. First of all, I don't get involved in personal cases, court cases, legal cases. Secondly, even if I did get involved, there's not much I could do about it. There's not much that can be done once you're once you're in the clutches of the divorce machinery. You're in their clutches, and I know how it works, but that doesn't mean I can help anybody. But thirdly, then what I also say is, if you really want to do something about this, speak out, call attention to it, take a public stand. That might, after all, give you some leverage with the judge. The judge, you're an important person, you're influential, you have a public profile. If you spoke out about the corruption in the divorce industry, about the family courts, and their injustices and their flagrantly illegal and unconstitutional behavior, if you spoke out about it, maybe it would call attention to it. That's the best thing you could do. And it might even do you some good in your own case. It might give you some leverage. It might make the judge afraid of you and, willing to treat you well because, they're afraid that you'll speak out and criticize their livelihood. But none of these famous or influential men or powerful men do this. They always want to handle their divorces privately, behind closed doors. They have lots of money. They're willing to pay off the lawyers, pay off the psychotherapists, pay off the custody evaluators, pay off the judges, pay off their ex-wives, pay off everybody. Doesn't matter. And just keep my name out of the public sphere, out of the public square on this, and let me get on with my my livelihood and my the power that I exercise on other political issues. So that's another reason that the conservatives won't touch this stuff, is that if an individual man does fall afoul of this in the conservative establishment, he doesn't take advantage of it, use it as an incentive to speak out and to do the right thing. He wants to cover it all up and handle it privately. So these are not people of integrity, I regret to say.
Yes, you see, I agree with you because even another content creator who touches upon our issues, he actually said that the Republican Party and conservatives, they talk about family values. Well, at the same time, if you look at these people's history and private lives, they are philanderers and they have numerous wives over the course of time. So how can they be spokespeople or family advocates if they're doing that personally? To me, that doesn't add up.
You're very right about that. You're right, and there've been a number of those scandals. A lot of them, especially, seems to be especially the pastors and the priests
Yes,
and the evangelicals
yes, yeah,
and Catholics. They're as bad as anybody. You're right, and you wonder how much of their religious faith or how much of their political conviction is just window dressing. And I think an awful lot of it is window dressing. Huge amount of it. Um, I mean, if they came out and said, "Look, yeah, I sinned. I've shown myself to be a hypocrite." After all, it's not hypocrisy anymore. Once you admit hypocrisy, it's not hypocrisy anymore.
yes, exactly.
So they could come out and make a confession, frank, either secular or faith-based confession, and they'd probably get some, and then go on the offensive and say, um, I'm not the only one. There's many other people. We all can learn from this, but they don't do it. They want to cover it up. They want to pay off their accusers and keep their head down, keep a low profile.
Yes, and I think that Pearlie actually does Pearlie things. She does a good job at exposing this hypocrisy that's going on.
She does. She's done that a lot recently. She's Pearl Davis. She's she's criticized women for the same thing. Traditional women who pose as what is called trad wives,
Yeah,
tradcoms and trad wives
yes,
who claim to be, traditional wives and uphold traditional values, but they're not living lives. Sometimes, even if they're not having, some of them have had extramarital affairs or premarital affairs, and many of them don't live the lives of trad wives. They're out there speaking out and politicking, and exercising political power, uh, and sometimes speaking out in the church, which of course the Bible says they shouldn't be doing. So yeah, it's men and women in that respect, especially those with high profiles and those who are powerful, those who could do something about it to rectify the situation.
yes. Now you talk a lot about young women, also referred to as quote teeny boppers, now shaping politics. Why are young women so leftist and feminist today?
Well, this is very important, and they're starting to people are starting to notice this, and I think this is under appreciated. What's going on? There's a piece of kind of soft milk toast piece in the Spectator recently that observed this. It's called something about toxic femininity, about how left wing, but others have observed it as well. That women, there's a Dutch think tank that said that young women today are the most left wing cohort in voting cohort in human history or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
that's pretty strong, and they are. We saw this in the last election. Young men are moving to the right. Even black men are moving to the right, whereas young women are moving toward the left, especially the feminist left, but the left generally. I think one of the things the Republicans and the Trump administration underappreciated was that um, Kamala Harris as a candidate was not an accident. We tend to laugh at her and to ridicule her. She was so preposterous and so ham-fisted and so illogical in many ways. A lot of conservatives kind of dismissed her as not a serious candidate. But I think she was. It was no accident that she was the candidate for the Democrats. She was endorsed by people like Taylor Swift, who has the entertainer, who has a high following among young women and adolescent girls. And they've moved very decisively to the left. And why is this? Well, there's been a lot of speculation about this. The theory that was put forth in the Spectator article was that social media is responsible, that social media allows these young girls to engage in all kinds of unladylike behavior, to say the least, to ridicule and to denigrate men, especially men in their private lives, in public.
Yes.
to breach the bounds of privacy and the border between private and public life, and not just to talk about sex and family as as a political conviction, but to actually humiliate members of their own family, whether it's their parents or their siblings, or especially their husbands or boyfriends, or the men that they've been involved in relationships with. So social media does certainly offer a huge opportunity for unscrupulous girls, young women, and women generally and men sometimes, but I think women are more prone to this, to acquire power and leverage in very traditionally female ways. I think, however, there's, just to further answer your question, I think there's something more to the why young women and girls are increasingly left wing. And this is very disturbing if I'm right about this, and I think there's no doubt about it. And that is, I think divorce itself makes children, especially girls, left wing and opens them to feminism. Why
Yes.
is that? Divorce, by its nature, marginalizes the father. It reduces the father's role. Now, a lot of people talk about parental alienation, and they claim that they say quite rightly that fathers are most likely to be the victims of parental alienation. That is, the mother deliberately alienating the children from the father and causing them to hate and dislike the father. But even when there's not this active alienation campaign by the mother, I think just by its nature, divorce undermines fathers more than mothers. It undermines the father's role. It marginalizes the father physically and morally. He can't discipline or correct or guide, effectively raise his children anymore. And so it has a very, many people believe that fathers more than mothers give moral instruction to children, especially when they're older and into adolescence, when they're in their most rebellious stages. This is precisely when the marginalization of the father kicks in. Many young children love their fathers. This happens a lot in divorce cases. The young children love their fathers and their mothers equally, without any, and they want them to be back together. But when they get into adolescence, you get something very different. They get rebellious. And that rebellion tends to be seen much more against fathers than against mothers. It's much more likely they will stand up and rebel against their father than against their mother. And I think girls do this more than boys, because boys are, of course, men, and they want to be fathers themselves someday. So they're less likely to vilify or denigrate the father. Some do, they do it. But, this is now this trend of cutting off, children cutting themselves off from their parents. That's the way the media portrays it. Children cutting off their relations, adult children, cutting off all relationships with their parents. Well, I know for a fact these are overwhelmingly girls, and they're overwhelmingly cutting themselves off from their fathers, and they're overwhelmingly the daughters of divorce. So I think divorce is the cause of this left. I think it breeds, and this cutting themselves off, alienation from their parents, I think leaves them susceptible to ideological influence. And if you don't like fathers and you don't like men, the logical ideology is feminism. So if I'm right about that, this is truly disturbing. Why? Because it means that feminism is feeding upon itself. It's breeding itself. It's perpetuating itself across the generations. The feminists brought in no-fault divorce. Many people don't realize that. It was the feminists that pushed for no-fault liberal divorce laws in the 70s. They were drafting these laws back in the 40s. It was entirely a feminist initiative. So the feminists brought in liberal divorce. And if liberal divorce is also turning daughters into feminists, then effectively the divorce is a machine, a self-perpetuating, self-expanding machine that breeds and feeds upon itself and breeds more feminists. And that's something if that's true, if there's any truth in what I'm saying there, then this is going to get worse before it gets better.
Yes, and I want to add to that. I do not. I think that you are right with that 100%. But I also believe that even when there is no divorce, through my upbringing throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, also by that time, and this had been taking place for several decades, I think, in the culture as well, to portray fathers in media as clowns, buffoons, authoritarians. And I don't mean authoritarians in a good way, authoritarian meaning tyrant. And that by the time the 80s came around, or maybe even sooner, maybe you know better than me, that fathers should just simply stay out of social matters. The father should be more like a friend. Any discipline is frowned upon, and just simply to be checked out. That's what I
Mm.
noticed. Up close, actually, noticing that.
Very true, very true. It's been in the media, and yeah, the divorce system can't help but uh, weaken fathers overall. Even those that remain married are often emasculated, removed from their authority as fathers in exactly the ways that you say. Um, there's uh, there's an anecdote in my book. I quote a father who says, in my first book, Taken into Custody, there's a father who says, anytime I disagree with my wife, she just pulls out the divorce papers and spreads them on the kitchen table and starts filling them in, and I know what the consequences of that will be. So I can't disagree with my wife about anything. I have no authority in the home. And and to go back to our subject of the conservatives, I think they've reinforced this. They talk a lot about fatherhood and men, the importance of men, the importance of fathers. They readily concede this. You find a lot of this in conservative rhetoric, how important fathers are to children. But then when it comes to actual fathers, they disparage them, they denigrate them, they criticize them for not living up to the ideal that the conservatives want us all to. Yeah, and you could see this, for example, in the book of conservative Senator Josh Hawley. He does this. He talks. What's his book called? Manhood, I think. But you can see this in all of them. Manhood is important, fatherhood is important, but the actual men are just sitting in their mother's basements playing video games and watching
Yes.
porn, and so we don't really have any real men anymore. And this has been a motif in conservative circles. I think it began with that book by what is her name? That conservative. She's with one of the think tanks, AAI, I think. I forget her name. Kay Himowitz. I forget the name of her book, but the subtitle is something like "How Feminism is Turning Men into Boys."
Yes, that one. I believe that book was is referred to in Roger Devlin's Sexual Utopia and Power. I think I know exactly what you're talking about, which one, which book, and which woman you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, conservatives won the election in 2024, but did they make any mistakes?
Well, I think that's the one they made, was not taking that constituency seriously. The Kamala Harris, the Swifties, the adolescent girls who are not just keen on Harris, but quite enthusiastic about her.
Yes.
And they were the ones, of course, that after Trump's election to a second term, in both terms, they began these huge outbreaks of female hysteria, especially among young women, claiming they were ill and just if they were this time around in 2024, they were talking about poisoning men, killing men as retribution for the
Yeah.
reelection of Donald Trump. This just Janice Fiamingo talks about this. A lot of people notice this. It wasn't adolescent boys. It wasn't young men. It was it was young adolescent girls who just, I mean, it fulfilled all of the stereotypes of, hysterical women. Just, and then, J.D. Vance did call attention to what he called, childless cat women, older women. But of course, the older women have to start somewhere. I think the older childless cat women start out as the, Swifties, the followers of Taylor Swift and Kamala Harris. So, I don't think, and again, if I'm right about this radicalization of girls, it's not going to it's not going to go away. The Democratic Party, people say the Democratic Party is made fools of themselves with Kamala Harris by putting up a clown like Kamala Harris. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that the Democratic Party still, I think that's a cohort, young women, that's only going to increase for the Democrats.
Yes, and what you said there reminds me of the 4B movement. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one. It didn't take off, but I actually had to look it up while I was listening to you. The 4B movement took off when Kamala was running, and that the goals of the 4B movement are to reject. Here it is on Google: to reject traditional patriarchal expectations for women, encapsulated in four refusals: no sex, no dating, no marriage, and no childbirth. So, what you said is spot on.
And they're getting their wish because men are reciprocating in kind. So if women are going on strike against men, and men are reciprocating and going on strike against women for different, I think, different motives. I don't think it's mutual hatred. I think in the case of the women, it is resentment and hatred and real, ideologically driven dislike of men. I think if men are boycotting women, it's more out of self-defense. It tends not to be necessarily ideologically driven, but the men too can sometimes be drafted into the ideology. And are we do we are what do we gain by that if men and women detest each other and boycott one another? And that seems to be where we're heading.
Well, I think it's a very sad story, actually. I don't think that bodes well for the future. It's kind of depressing, actually, if we can't get along with each other.
Yeah, and this especially the thing that bothers me is and maybe this is for another show, but I'll just mention it because I think it's the conservatives do the same thing. Um, the women don't seem to get the point. I mean, the men are boycotting. The men are hearing their message about how evil and feckless and useless and puerile and disgusting men are, and so they're refraining from marriage and refraining from relationships with women, and yet the women seem to feel increasingly entitled to a man with 6 feet to with a six-figure income and all the rest. They don't seem to get the fact that they have to compromise. But what's really odd, and this touches on my theme in my article about that the right has been feminized, the conservatives have been feminized, is they show the same illogic. They think when men are refraining from marriage and families and dating and so forth, the solution is not to reform the marriage laws and divorce laws and the family courts and rectify the situation. The the solution is to scold men and nag men. So
Yes.
the conservatives kind of take on this feminine, and scolding and nagging. These are things we I think rightly associate with femininity, with the female behavior. And this is,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly what the conservatives do. They talk about manhood and manliness and all these masculine virtues, but their solution for the men that they disapprove is not to reform the laws so that these men can act like men without being arrested. Instead, their solution is to simply scold and nag the men and to be fathers and to put their head in the noose. So that it's illogical. It doesn't make the slightest bit of sense that they can get what they want. Nobody responds to scolding.
Yes. And exactly. And I also think that it's very irritating. I mean, to
Mhm.
tell young men to constantly improve. I'm not sure if you seen that kind of talk, that kind of narrative where the men
Mm.
constantly have to improve, and then if they improve, well, that's not enough. You just have to keep on. I think it was Paul Elam who and Shah who call it the self improvement treadmill. I'm not sure if it was them or get on a hamster wheel of self improvement. Well, where's the end to this? What does a man have to do to be a man?
Right. Well, yeah, and of course, none of us is against self-improvement. I mean, self-improvement's a good thing.
Yes.
It's what religion teaches, for example.
Yes.
And we can be, we should constantly look inside of us, and we should improve. But there's a sense in which, as you say, if it's just one-sided, if it's about how we're the sinners and we're the only sinners, That's not that's not a sound theology, for one thing, that men are sinners and women are not. We're all sinners, and we're all in the same boat, and we all have to repent, and we all have to, if you take Christian doctrine seriously or any religious doctrine. So there is and by the way, that's also characteristic of the therapeutic culture, which is a characteristically feminine culture, is that the therapeutic culture does demand that we look inside and improve ourselves, which to a point can be healthy, but it's not enough. Now, having said all that, I suspect there might be an unintended consequence of all this desire for men to improve. And that is when people start improving and they start listening to gurus that tell them how to improve, sometimes they can go beyond, once they've decided they've improved enough, they may start deciding that they are entitled to some certain rights as well as their responsibilities. They might decide that their improvement gives them a certain claim to participation in the society. And this is what radical religious movements do. And I've written quite a lot on radical religious movements. I wrote a book about the Puritans. The Puritans did not start out as a radical revolutionary movement. They started out as a movement urging people to look inside and repent their sins and remedy their lives and improve themselves. But eventually, when they do that after several decades of doing this, people took that to heart. They did look inside. They did improve themselves. And gradually, they started deciding that this gave them the moral authority to start having a say in how the society was run. And they ended up dethroning the king, because up to that point, the only person that decided anything was the king. That's the basis of monarchy. The basis of monarchy is that one man makes the decisions. And when the people decided that they had reformed themselves adequately, they started saying, well, maybe we should be making some of the decisions. They overthrew the king, they executed him, and they created a republic. And the Americans did something similar in early America when they declared their independence. So, those who are constantly urging men to improve themselves, they may find that there's some unexpected outcome to this.
Yes. Now, why do you say ordinary citizens can do more than professional politicians?
Well, that's a good point, because ultimately in a republic, we're all supposed to be citizens, are the ones that are supposed to be running the show. And well, I already explained why the professional politicians, professional politicos, don't really want to win the battles. They want to just acquire power for themselves. But there's also, let's say there's a more concrete reason for that. And that is that, and I point this out in my most recent published book, anyone who's paid to solve a problem has a vested pecuniary interest in not solving the problem, in perpetuating the problem and even exacerbating the problem that they are paid to solve, right? And conservatives are the first to point this out. They especially like to point it out in the United States about federal bureaucrats. Federal bureaucrats don't solve problems, because if they solve problems, they do themselves out of a job. So the bureaucrats have an incentive to a vested interest in not solving the problems that they're paid to solve. They have a vested interest in perpetuating those problems, making them worse if possible. Right? And this is the conservative critique of bureaucracy and, the Washington culture and so forth. Pardon me. What the conservatives don't tell you is that they too, the professional conservatives, they too have the same incentive not to solve the problem. It's not just bureaucrats, it's anybody who's paid to solve a problem, whether it's a think tank or a political party or an office holder or even a university lecturer. If your livelihood depends on a problem, then you'll do anything to make sure that problem never goes away. So what the conservatives' political class says about the bureaucrats is also true of the professional political class itself, including the conservative political class. If they didn't have problems to complain about and bureaucrats to complain about, they too would be out of work. So they have an incentive to make the problems worse and not solve them, especially if solving them brings risk. And, they can be voted out of office. Now, citizens are different. You and I, when we're confronted with a public problem in our community, we don't have an incentive to make it worse. We have an incentive to solve it. Going at solving a local problem, I don't know, stray dogs, something, you name it, any kind of problem that breaks out in the community. Um, uh, if we want to deal with that problem, if we want to address that problem, crime, whatever, we have to take time off from our work, time off from our family, time off from our hobbies, time off from our pastimes, time off from the things that give us pleasure and provide our sustenance. We have to take time off. So for a citizen, dealing with civic problems is sacrificial. It involves the sacrifice of your time, your money, your effort. You have an incentive to deal with that problem, to solve it, to get together with other citizens, to resolve the problem, and to get back to your family, your job, your home, the things you enjoy, and so forth. So even though citizens, we don't have much time and we're not professionals, and we don't get paid to do civic engagement, civic participation, but we do have a vested interest in solving the problems of our community, and it'll make our community better. So there's a fundamental material difference in incentives between the unpaid citizen, the amateur, and the political professional.
Yes. See, some people have told me in this space, I have not been here a long time, but some people have told me, not as a criticism, they've just said it about me, that I'm too optimistic. But I'm not sure if I'm too optimistic. For example, I will share something about me here. This topic hits home with me because my wife and I, we homeschool our two children. Excuse me, we homeschool
Good.
two children. So we are friends with other homeschoolers. When we moved out to this area of New York, we just used the internet to meet other homeschoolers, and now there is a homeschooling group. And we've even befriended other couples that have the same values and ideas that we have. And it's this tight knit, well, kind of like, let's say, a very small, tight knit community of several couples who homeschool their children. But we have friendships with them. So we have the same values. So probably we're going to inculcate our children with the same values that we have. Is that an example of citizens using their own resources to make a difference?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, you've taken my argument a step further, because what you pointed out there is that citizens are not very effective as individuals by themselves. They're effective when they join together with others. So it's well known that citizens need people need organization. Organization can make you much more effective. We all need we're kind of organized. We're social organizational beings. Human beings are. We naturally join together with other people. So organization is very important for citizens to be effective. And that's why I say that groups like yours are important. And I also say that churches are very important, because churches are voluntary associations of citizens, of amateurs, of people who are driven by conviction, whose active participation in the church and the community, and by extension, the polity, the political community, is sacrificial. If a church gets together and solves a problem, they aren't paid for it. They have to do it. They have to sacrifice their time and money and in order to further those ends. And even the clergy, if they're, if they're honest, if they're the rightly, they're paid, of course. The clergymen are paid, but they're generally paid to save souls and to engage in pastoral activity, not to engage in political activity. If they want to engage in community engagement for civic duties or something, for a political injustice, then that too is, in theory at least, sacrificial, and it requires the sacrifice of their other duties and their time and so forth. Now, if they start becoming professional politicos, political activists, then it's a different matter. They cross the line, and they become, they have an incentive to become, to perpetuate the problems. But you see, that's why churches differ from interest groups, pressure groups, political parties, and the new organizations of the political class, because those organizations, parties, interest groups, pressure groups, and so forth, think tanks, they don't have an incentive to solve the problems. They have an incentive to perpetuate the problems because that's what their livelihood and their income and their profile and their power and influence are based on. So churches, I realize that a lot of men, especially, don't have much faith in churches today. And they're right not to. Churches have not been doing their job. They've been very strongly feminized. They've been taken over as social clubs, primarily by women, and men have been marginalized in churches. But I still think that churches, well, put it this way, it's a lot easier to defeminize a church, enter a church, join together with other men, and defeminize a church than it is to defeminize an entire nation. So I would suggest to men at least give it a try. Start there and become active in your local, again, think global. What is it? What's the slogan? Think global, act local.
Yes.
Start in the church, start in the community. That's where you're going to, if men do that everywhere, then you will regain the nation. You will redeem the nation. But churches, why not start with the churches? It's so hard to start an organization. Men have been very ham-fisted when it comes to starting. Look, there's no men's rights organization, fathers' rights organization. They just don't exist. Men have tried to create them. They don't work. They fall. They flop.
Yes.
They defy efforts. I was president of one for 2 years. I won't tell you why it flopped, but it flopped. And it's so why not start with ready-made organizations, even if they're very, very imperfect as they are now?
Yes. Because I'm with you on that. I mean, I think that it would be beneficial even if men just joined men's groups. That's one thing that I think that can happen. I mean, well, there are men's groups that people attend.
Mhm. Men's groups within churches, you mean?
There are men's groups in churches, and there's also just men's groups.
Oh, I
People can
see.
join, yes, even online or I guess places that people attend.
Mm.
In favor of those also.
Very much so. Yes. No, you're right. Men's groups, fathers groups, and I would not rule out men's groups at churches. Men's groups at churches tend to be self-flagellation sessions where men talk about how evil, how bad they are, and how. But I don't think they do it out of conviction. I think they do it because they think that's what's expected of them. I think if you scratch below the surface, I think you get a lot of men in men's groups in churches that go through the motions of self-flagellation, but underneath they are very upset about the control of their churches by women and feminization. So, I would urge men, yes, as you say, join men's groups, join in and out of churches. And for those who don't, one of the things I hear a lot, oh, I don't care about politics, I don't care about religion, I don't care about men's rights or fathers' rights. I don't want to get into that. I just want to be left alone. I just want to keep my head down, you know, stay away from women as much as possible. Well, the best answer I think I've got to that is that this can get worse before it gets better. This will get worse
Yes.
before it gets better. The feminists are constantly looking for ways to destroy men, frankly, and to put men in prison, to find
Yes.
ways to incarcerate men on ever more flimsy pretexts. And the conservatives show no tendency whatsoever to stand up to this. So if you think you can keep your head down and be left alone, I think you should think about it again.
Yes, I agree with you. How does custody of children translate into political power and civic health?
Well, that's a big question, and that's a hard one to answer. But I think it does. It was one of the first things that the feminists went after. Um, it was one of the first battles they won, and major battles. And it was really, in many ways, it was the first battle they won after the in the 60s they won it. They got custody of children basically without a shot being fired. In fact, they got it long before that. The no fault divorce was only merely codified what was already taking place over decades. Women were getting custody of children, and the feminist groups were pushing very hard for that. And if you go back to the origins of the welfare state back in the early 20th century, that really also gave a big boost to female custody. And if you look at the priority that feminists give to abortion, both of those issues have the same thing in common. It's control of the reproductive system. So, controlling reproduction, controlling the next generation, it's been a high priority for the feminists. And one of my heroes, Professor Daniel Amneus, says in his book, The Case for Father Custody, that is the essence of feminism. It is the basis of feminist power. And Amneus says that if you can break the female custody system, female custody after divorce, if you can break that, you can break the entire feminist movement. And the more I get involved in this, the more I research this, the more I decide he's completely correct about this. It is the most important thing to get custody, for men to get custody of children will basically break the back of the feminist movement. And I think all of the other battles that men face, the grievances of men, the claims and complaining that men have about their disadvantages are, first of all, less important than that one. But secondly, I think they'll also more or less be much easier to solve if that one is solved first. I think increasingly I'm convinced that should be the top priority.
Yes, and I keep recommending his book, The Case for Father Custody, in these talks because that book had a huge impact on me. And he does show over and over. It is a repetitive book. He's very repetitive in that book. Maybe he could have shortened that book by about 50 pages, I think. But he really did hit home his point, though.
He
And
does, and you can't stop reading it. Everyone says this to me that they once they start reading it with all the repetition he makes in there, it's very readable book. Yeah, man, considering the man was a what was he, a Shakespeare scholar?
yes,
You'd think he would write in more meticulous scholarly fashion, and he
no,
does provide lots of documentation and footnotes. I mean, it is well documented.
yes.
But it's obvious he wrote that book and all his books very quickly, and yet somehow it works. It works very well, and I can't recommend it enough.
Yes, and also another book that I want to recommend here is The Garbage Generation by Dr. Daniel Amneus. And that
Mm.
also is a book that as you said here, I keep going back to. And even there are quotes in The Garbage Generation in the Case for Father Custody that I only read once, but I can recall the quote verbatim. It was that hard hitting.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised that people do not mention Dr. Daniel Amneus more frequently, but perhaps we could talk about him in another show in more detail and review his books.
I think that would be important. Yeah, you're right. The quotations from feminists themselves are
Yes.
very revealing. Very revealing. The book is worth reading for that alone, and the Garbage Generation also. So yes, it's absolutely important. And yes, we've done a very poor job of there's a whole he wrote that book. He published it, I think, in '99, and there's a whole generation or more of of scholars, activists, some journalists who were writing about these things in those days, whose works have been completely forgotten. And I think we're paying for that dearly, because when we forget, then when everybody tries to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, when everyone thinks that they thought this up, went to family court this morning and they thought it all up, then they write a big expose and they do it. Uh, you know, uh, they want to make a big flash in the pan. They want to make a big show the world what the injustice is, but it just goes in one ear and out the other. The media might pick up on it for a day or two, but then it's all forgotten. Whereas once we begin to realize that this literature has been going on since at least the '90s, and there's there's actually literature before that, but it really became, for a number of reasons that we can discuss some other time, the injustices and the corruption of family court really took off in the 1990s. That's really when things um, uh, went out of control. And there's a number of very good writers who tried to call attention to this, even within the mainstream media, and they were just like Amneus, and they have been just ignored.
Yes. And even Devlin talks about this also, and I want to put this in there before we wrap things up, is that even Devlin said in Sexual Utopia and Power that men, for a very long time, keep ceding and ceding. They keep on making concessions at the expense of themselves. And
Hmm.
I don't understand where this comes from, but that's worth looking into in a future conversation, perhaps. But I also want to ask you that you mentioned feminized men and masculized women. How does gender impact power in society?
Ooh, that's a huge one.
Well,
That's a
that's
huge one. Let's just say, as far as feminized men, let's just say um, that we're all feminized, all of us, in many ways. I mean, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. This stuff was just starting, but I absorbed it. I internalized it. Every day through my research and my books, my writing, I come up with ways that I've bought into these myths, and these, and I've always given feminists and women the benefit of the doubt. And I say, I think, like you say, we all concede turf, we give ground, because when we get into this ourselves, before it hits us personally, we're willing to give women, feminists, even the benefit of the doubt, until we come home one day and our children have been taken away, and then suddenly we don't anymore. We don't. Our patience usually at that point comes to an end. Um, but as far as feminized, I think what it is what feminism has done is it's changed one of the dynamics of society, where power and influence and respect are no longer given to people who are more masculine, as the feminists believed at first. Nowadays, it's given to people who are more power and influence and wealth go to people who are more feminine. I think in many ways that's the lesson of the homosexual activists and the transgenderists. I think the homosexualists and the transgenderists discover that power, influence, wealth comes to people who have been feminized, and that's also true of the political professional right. They too have become feminized. Um, so there's a dynamic. Women have always been respected and always will be, but men had to have special respect because they had to earn it, and they still, and so the respect that men get is much more vulnerable, much weaker, much more unstable. And when you take that respect away from masculinity and give it to femininity, you're um, you're doubling you're doubling the already unconditional respect that femininity gets, and you're taking away the conditional femininity that men have to earn, and you're making it impossible for them to earn it. You're giving it to women who don't have to earn it. So
yes.
that's a short answer to a big question, to a
Well,
long.
yes, that could take a very long discussion. Actually, it could take up an entire show. Actually, now, given that neither the left, nor the right adequately address the family crisis, can citizens really break the left-right political duopoly?
That again is another big question. You know, People are always talking about that a lot these days. You hear a lot. The distinction between left and right is broken down. A lot of people, the old division between left and right no longer holds. You get left wing capitalists, left wing plutocrats, and right wing pacifists, right wing anti-war activists. So I don't think we're quite there yet. I think the left and the right are still with us. I think they're changing though, and one of the ways I think the left has changed. The left has changed. It's become sexual. The dominant um, form of left wing activism today is sexual. The sexual left, Marxism, socialism, even liberalism, I think, are things are basically going out. They've been replaced. They've been displaced by feminism and sexual ideology generally. People call it, what is it, cultural Marxism and all this. I think this is nonsense. It's a new ideology. Marxism has basically went out with the Cold War, essentially. And it's been replaced by a new ideology on the left, which is feminism. And I think the right doesn't know how to deal with that. They haven't been able to They haven't understood. They want to refight the Cold War. They want to refight the Marxism. They want to vilify Russia and China, and they want to because they won the Cold War. The right basically we defeated the communists in Russia and the Soviet Union and in China. So let's just refight the Cold War and everything okay. Whereas taking on the feminists is a lot more daunting, a lot more dangerous, and they just don't know how to do it. So we'll have to see how they. I think in many ways the ball is in the conservatives' court. They're the ones that need to step up to the plate. The left is doing very well. After all, the left lost the Cold War, and yet today they're winning. They lost the Cold War. Their ideologies, their liberal, socialist, communist, Marxist ideology failed manifestly. And yet who's winning today? It's the left, not the right. Because they have this power to reinvent themselves, to come up with new grievances and new agendas, which they've done very skillfully, primarily sexual ones. And the right is, especially the professional right, is scared and disoriented, and they don't know how to deal with this. So what do? They bring dissident leftists on the stage to fight their battles for them. They complain about, this attack on women in locker rooms and in women's sports and washrooms and so forth. This is an attack on women. No, it isn't. Feminism is not an attack on women. I mean, this is complete nonsense. And so, they just they want to ingratiate themselves with feminists rather than confront them.
Yeah, I see that. And something I actually want to touch upon, and perhaps this is more appropriate for another show, but I keep on thinking about this throughout this conversation, especially the latter half of our conversation, is that I can't seem to think of an idea or reason of why these feminists have such hostility towards us men, because men, as we've been saying here, want to work with women. We value and love and respect women. And we've made all kinds of concessions and provided all kinds of things to our infrastructure and inventions to help women. If we behave in this way, in these sorts of, let's say, cooperative ways, where does this hatred come from? It doesn't make sense to me. I don't even know where to even find the reason.
No, there's some interesting, psychological theories about that, of course,
Yes.
about what women find attractive in men, what men find attractive in women. Many of them are undergirded by evolutionary psychology, which you may or may not accept. I won't go into that because it's not my area of expertise.
Yeah.
I will, as one whose area of expertise is in concentration is politics and ideologies. I'll say this. I think it boils down to a desire for political power, feminism is, after all, a political ideology, and it does seek political power, which is an insatiable lust, like sexual lust. Both sexual lust and political lust for political power are open-ended and insatiable. And women, you're right. We do afford. Society has always afforded women a lot of respect, deference, um, you know, over the years. But the one thing we've not given them is political power. We give them privileges, we give them deference, we give them money, we give them protection, we give them provision, we give them lots of things. But the one thing we've never given them is political power. And women that don't want political power tend not to be feminists. They're happy. A lot of women don't. A lot of women don't want political power. They want and they're happy with men, and they're happy to to have their domain within the household and so forth. But women who want political power, ideologues, they're the ones that tend to be feminists. That's the one thing they resent more than anything about men, and that's why I believe that's why feminism has become little more and nothing less than a way to put men into prison, and a way to incarcerate men, because men will always have As long as men are free from prison, free from incarceration, and free uh, in the sense of free to express themselves, they will always exercise superior, I think, political power more than women will, just by their numbers, because it's part of the masculine impulse. Whereas um, the feminists are primarily women. That's the one thing you can give them everything else, and they won't be happy. Sexual freedom, provision, money, respect, deference, beauty, whatever. Give them all the feminine things you want. They won't be happy until they have political power and until men are eliminated. So I think that's where this is going.
Yes, because even some men that I've conversed with who say that they are sympathetic to feminism, I have sometimes asked them if they can quote a feminist, considering what you and I know about feminists and what Daniel Amneus has provided us with direct quotes from feminists themselves. I have asked some men, what feminists are you fond of? What do you think feminism is? Can you name a feminist that you've read literature from? And they will not be able to answer me.
Mm.
So
That's a good point. Interesting point.
So
Yeah.
I believe that many of them have no idea what they're talking about, and they have no idea the ramifications.
No, I think you're right about that. How many Marxists have actually read Marx?
Yes.
you know, it's often pointed out. No, you're right about that. When I was a young man, I grew up in a liberal leftist environment. As an adolescent, I was more or less sympathetic with feminism. I went along with it. I buckled when it came to some of the extreme man haters, and I knew female feminists who also, you know, buckled when they were confronted with it. So I knew there was a such thing as, or at least I thought there was a such thing as moderate, reasonable, liberal feminists who did not hate men, who did not want to eradicate or incarcerate men. Um, so it was easy to get sucked into that milieu, especially in those days. It was primarily educated women and educated men from affluent households who were willing to who sympathized with feminism as a who came from liberal left backgrounds and saw this as just an additional additional matter of injustice. I think today we're faced with something different. We talked about the adolescent girls and Swifties and Kamala Harris. These are not girls or young women who have necessarily thought about it or
Right.
read about it, or uh, they're not necessarily politically or socially literate. So I think what we're dealing with here is a kind of feminism which is very much more dangerous than what we had when I was an adolescent in the 70s. I think what we're dealing with here is a kind of visceral, emotional um, kind of feminism that appeals to anger and resentment and confusion of young women who've been victims in many ways of they are victims of the divorce machinery. And the more thoughtful women and men um, nowadays, I think, are much less likely to endorse feminism than they were when I was a young man.
Yes, because if you do read some of the literature from people like some of these names, Shulamith Firestone, Del Mahane, Barbara Ehrenreich, I don't think people who are lucid and sane and level-headed could read these statements from these people and think that they are making sense or think that they are loving and caring and reasonable. I don't think that someone could read this and actually say, yes, I'm on board with feminism after being exposed to their writings.
Yeah, it is. It is odd. I know. I remember when I was an undergraduate, a feminist. She's still around. Mary Daly visited our campus, and she gave a lecture. And it was a public, at college paid for it. It was expense of the students. We all paid for it. And she refused at the end to take any questions from men. She only took questions from women. And a number of women immediately spoke up and said, this is crazy. You can't do this.
Yes.
You can't do this. And then they objected to it very strongly. The meeting broke up. The speaker and the people who invited her, the feminists who invited her, went off to another room and had their meeting, continued the meeting themselves, and the rest of us left. And I was there with a woman I was seeing at the time, and she was a feminist, and she agreed. She thought this was ridiculous that this woman would do this, but she still considered herself a feminist, and I was still sympathetic. So it's amazing how we could, at least in those days, compartmentalize it, and you know, we were able to sympathize. We didn't sympathize with the lunatic man hater, but we still thought that feminism was a worthy, goal. So you can't underestimate the power of an ideology to, um, I don't know, to appeal to people's sense of self-righteousness, moral superiority, um, intellectual arrogance. Um, and I don't think I'd read very many feminists in those days.
Yes. Yeah, I see. So, all right, that wraps it up for the conservative debacle. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for the helpful and intelligent questions.